There are multiple ways to interpret freedom that has been implemented in many ways throughout a number of games. A game can allow you to build your world to your liking. You can dig into a game's mechanics or story to develop a higher level of skill and knowledge. It can allow you to express your style of fighting to overcome challenges in your own way, or maybe it's a game crafted with your character's chains broken, allowing you to explore without being stuck to a strict formula. There are costs and benefits to a game allowing you to truly be free. It's nice to give players the benefit of choosing their own path and not be offered guidance of any kind, but without a set structure, it can be hard to craft a meaningful sense of progression in a way that makes you feel accomplished. A lot of games that market a sense of open-endedness tend to fall into design traps that harm the experience rather than benefit it. Experiencing events in an inconsistent or unsatisfying order, finding a way to become overpowered far before the developers ever intended you to, enemy scaling, or a quantity of glitches that are minimized in a game with a structured layout. Open-ended games are still a beloved type for a reason. I've no doubt sunk several hours into a handful of them. It's just incredibly difficult for games that emphasize freedom to allow it while giving a clear feeling of progression without necessarily telling you where you need to go. However, there is one game that I know fires on all cylinders when it comes to freedom and progression. A game that I consider to be a masterclass at what it does and one of the best games in this medium. That game is Relogic's Terraria. Despite axing the third dimension, Terraria finds its own way to express freedom in numerous varieties. Relogic has evolved the game far beyond what it initially started as. The road from versions 1.0 to 1.4.4 has been a constant ride in experiencing how Terraria has been developed into a game unlike any other title out there. Though I won't be documenting the game's progress from the first release all the way to what it is today, that's an entirely different beast. It isn't a secret that Terraria often gets compared to Minecraft from a far distance. Both are sandbox games about exploring new worlds and transforming it into your own. What I aim to cover in this piece is how Terraria showcases freedom in multiple angles, and how it still finds a way to be one of the most compellingly structured games in the industry. Perhaps we don't need a third dimension to have that realization come to be. I'm Ryder, and you're listening to a Terraria Retrospective. Terraria first asks you to create your own character. While it isn't the most in-depth character creation tool out there, it's stylistic enough with a vast array of options for you to create an identity of your own. Once you create a world and spawn in, there isn't much to see at first glance, though the game presents you with a few options. If you're clueless, the game immediately makes it known that you aren't alone in this world. The first NPC serves as the game's guide that advises you on what you should do if you want to survive and get a head start. It's only natural that you'd start chopping trees with the tools you start out with and build a house for you and the guide to stay safe for when the monsters inevitably emerge at night. Slimes will slowly spawn in from each direction to ease you into the combat mechanics, but this also shows that NPCs are somewhat capable of defending themselves, as they have their own weapons to defeat lesser enemies with. Houses do need to be built in a specific way in order for NPCs to properly live in them, like requiring light, a table, a chair, a way in and out, and a background wall to emphasize a sense of security. If the moon hasn't fully risen and zombies aren't coming out to endanger you, it may be a good idea to investigate the world you're in after you build a house and check what's available to you. You might stumble upon the entrance to a cave, perhaps a new biome with new materials and enemies, or likely a chest containing some helpful items to start with. If you haven't wandered into a cave, the first night will likely be you sitting in your shelter with the guide, either seeing what you can craft with what you've gathered so far, or discussing what to do next with him as monsters swarm your house, making it incredibly difficult to go outside and explore. So the next day you may decide to make a house of your own as to not live with just the guide, or perhaps it's advised to make multiple houses. And if you've collected 50 silver coins from either finding them in chests or slaying a healthy dose of enemies, your second NPC, the merchant, will eventually arrive at your world. This not only gives you a shop to spend your hard-earned currency on some useful items like a piggy bank that stores coins that you would normally drop from dying, but it also serves as a step in forming a community in your world. So, naturally, you make more houses, explore your world more, and soon you'll have the nurse come by who fully restores your health for a price, the demolitionist who sells explosive items, the dye trader who sells dye for your armor and accessories and trades you special kinds of dye for giving him these strange plants, the arms dealer who sells guns and ammunition after you likely have picked up a gun from curiously smashing a shadow orb or a crimson heart, and so many more NPCs that liven up your world. On your first few playthroughs, at least in my case, you'll likely build some kind of crazy hotel that all the NPCs live in. This does give you easy access to all of the shops and benefits of each NPC. However, NPCs do have their own feelings. They each have a level of happiness, and cramming all of them into one house is one of the things they hate the most. Some NPCs actually hate each other, and some don't even like where they live, so maybe they should live elsewhere. The NPC happiness system encourages you to not just build one central hub in your world, but multiple. There are 8 unique biomes that NPCs can live in. They can be satisfied with most places, but they do have a favorite and undesired location. The arms dealer and nurse not only both take a liking to the desert, but they also vibe with one another. So maybe you could build a nice oasis home for them in this peaceful variation of the desert biome. The angler can be found washed up at the ocean, so you could build a nice hut there and maybe bring another NPC so he isn't lonely. Bringing the NPCs into a comfortable living space in different biomes not only satisfies them, but they also reward you by giving you the option to purchase a biome's pylon. If you're standing near a pylon, they allow you to warp to other pylons you've placed throughout the world, as long as there are happy villagers near them. And this is the biggest reward and greatest incentive for building your world in Terraria. As you progress through the game, NPCs like the mechanic and the steampunker sell items that assist in fleshing out your world even more by selling electronic devices and wiring systems. But the pylons single-handedly encourage building as a major aspect of the game and entices you to build from the start. As the updates have gone on, Terraria has fine-tuned the building to become such a seamless process. You can make buildings more appealing structurally by using a crafting table to make a hammer, allowing you to turn blocks into half-steps or slopes. Originally, you needed an axe to destroy wooden blocks like in other survival games like Minecraft, but now the pickaxe is the one-stop shop to break any kind of block. If placing and breaking blocks is too time-consuming, the Smart Cursor function rapidly places and destroys things quickly, like filling in walls in a house, mining in a specific direction, or even building stairs. And even if you need to quickly place items away in a chest you've placed, there's a button in the inventory menu that quickly stashes items in chests they're already sorted in. Such a nice quality of life feature. Terraria not only gives you the tools to create your 2D landscape, but has also continued to build on itself. Even as your own playthrough progresses, you build with Terraria. Once you set foot into a cave in Terraria, it can be challenging to climb out at first in the literal sense, but eventually it'll be hard to bring yourself to warp back home using that magic mirror you may have found in a chest. Despite how two-dimensional the world may look at a first glance, in actuality, you'll be diving into a kind of world almost akin to a Metroidvania. Generated caves are common in Terraria, and being able to catch glimpses of them most of the time while you're mining makes your expedition constantly keep things motivating. Most of the time while you're digging, there's a load of mineral ore waiting to be mined in chunks to be smelted at a furnace to craft useful tools to aid for your adventure. If there were just ores and enemies waiting for you in the caves, things would get tedious rather quickly, and they knew this. So sprinkled throughout the underground are constant sources of eye candy. One of mining's biggest pleasures are life crystals shimmering, waiting to be picked up. Consuming one allows you to permanently increase your health by 20 points, and with one use, the search immediately begins for 14 more to increase your health to the maximum of 400 HP. Seeing items and other discoveries like these by just the corner of your vision is what makes exploring the underground constantly engaging. Coming across an abandoned house gives you the adrenaline needed to keep going, as you wonder what goodies lie in the chest to aid in your progress, and it makes you want to find more. And so you find a minecart track, a ginormous new section of possibilities waiting to have its secrets unveiled. Finding a large cave like this can guarantee several minutes of engaging exploration. It all adds up. If the game has something it just desperately wants you to see, sometimes a small fairy will come and fly around you for a while. If there's an item of interest nearby, it will make an effort to guide you to its fascination, often lighting up other areas of interest along the way that catch your attention, and the fairy's end destination is usually something pretty good, so it's a good idea to follow it if it catches eye on something. Then your eye may be caught by a mysterious blue glow, as just a few feet away you might uncover an underground mushroom biome, a well-lit area that is sure to contain helpful materials with its blue glowing grass highlighting ores and life crystals surrounding it. It also offers distinct visual variety, another key feature that makes each section you explore feel unique. You can stumble across a cave of marble blocks being guarded by skeletons throwing spears, a cave full of spiderwebs hosted by giant wall creepers that make your skin crawl. There are sometimes areas full of sparkling gems, no doubt useful for magic weapons and other useful tools. Even areas that change the moss and grass color help flesh out the darkest corner of your world to feel realized. If you're tired of mining in the same types of caves, certain biomes have their own unique cave systems. The underground desert has a lot of cacti, antlions, and crushing sand, and it's host to some of its own unique goodies. The underground snow is filled with ice, filled with its own unique ice chests to help combat the detriments of the frozen areas, and houses enemies that drop unique materials for some crafting items. Not to mention crashing through a giant chunk of weak ice is loads of fun. Perhaps the most significant underground area is the underground jungle. The jungle is already filled with enemies that keep you on your toes in the early game, but below that is a murky world of wild plant life and more bees than you'll ever want to see in your life. Yet here you can find some of the most useful materials and upgrades early on inside of giant rich mahogany trees and mysterious glowing huts. I do especially like how in this area, a useful material called a jungle spore helps traversal of this area become more enjoyable, as it is not only a useful material for crafting certain weapons and especially magic armor, but it provides light so you know where to dig next. And oftentimes it'll lead you straight to a giant beehive where the queen bee awaits for battle, or the giant jungle temple containing secrets that can't be discovered at the moment due to a locked door, and is surrounded by impenetrable blocks. Terraria uses the lack of a third dimension to its absolute most beneficial use and creates a type of progression in a game you can't get in a 3D title. This piece of candy method of exploration is what makes Terraria one of the finest examples of progression I've seen in a game, and it's why it's so addicting going back down the rabbit hole for more. Eventually, you'll mine down far enough to hit layers of lava with more heated dangers making exploration difficult, and if you dare mine low enough, you'll notice that the background wall is cut off by a bright, fiery shine, as hitting this level only means one thing: you've reached the underworld. The underworld is a fiery hellscape containing the toughest enemies you've faced so far. The central ore of this area, Hellstone, can only be mined with a pickaxe of a tier of the level of a Nightmare or Deathbringer pickaxe, or the Reaver Shark if you went fishing a bunch. And not only that, mining it produces lava, meaning you can't barge into an ore vein and go at it. You have to take a different approach to mining it. The underworld is by far one of the most dangerous places to explore, which only means it's even more rewarding to loot all of its goodies, because breaking pots here will give you high-tier potions and a lot of ammo and money. Sometimes you can even obtain an obsidian skin potion so you can swim through lava to go on a hellstone mining spree for 5 minutes. Despite it being incredibly challenging, you always want to come back to the underworld for extra resources. It's definitely the place I went to get a bunch of healing potions and hellfire arrows. And if you veered far enough on either the left or right side of your world, there's a chance you can see a strange glow in a cave housing multiple different types of gem trees. Well, surely this must be important, you think to yourself. Should you choose to follow that route, you'll be met with one of Terraria's greatest wonders: the Aether with a lake called the Shimmer. This beautiful prismatic lake isn't just for show. Jumping into the water makes you descend through blocks until you are below the Shimmer, but it doesn't just affect you. Enemies will go through the water too and either transform or remain unaffected or even deceased. Arrows will bounce right out of the surface of the water. Most importantly, certain items can be tossed into the lake and be transformed into something else entirely. As an example, a life crystal will become a vital crystal, an item that, once consumed, permanently increases your health regeneration. Experimenting with different items can lead to alternative results or enhanced results, and it's worth trying for yourself. When I discovered the Shimmer, I immediately made an underground jungle village right next to it so I could get a pylon that allows me to frequently visit it. I didn't even mention everything that could be found while mining. There's so many secrets to uncover on your own. And without a doubt, with areas and rewards like these, Terraria is not only worthy, but is absolutely excitedly ready to be dug right into. As harsh as it sounds to say right out the gate, I would go as far as to say that Terraria makes you feel weak when you first start. You're only barely capable of fighting enemies outside at nighttime, and there's a chance you'll die multiple times trying to get far in a cave or even across the surface. As you dig through the caves and fight through enemies, you'll start adapting to the nature around you. You'll find a variety of weapons that do damage higher than your copper short sword, and you'll obtain enough ore to deck yourself in armor, increasing your defense. Especially important are the many accessories that you can equip. Some enhance your stats in a meaningful way, yet others can affect your mobility entirely. Hermes boots are no doubt a necessity, a pair of shoes that allow you to run far faster than you initially would. Then there are also rocket boots sold by the Goblin Tinkerer that allow brief flight, and with the Tinkerer's Workshop you can combine them with the Hermes boots to create Spectre boots, combining both items together to allow fast running and slightly more vertical exploration. There's a Clown a Bottle that allows a double jump to help break a fall, climbing claws and spike shoes that allow you to wall jump, flippers that allow you to swim. There are a lot of accessories to help mobility, yet the grappling hook, a tool unassociated with accessory slots, is by far the most useful one. allowing you to grapple to blocks that would normally be out of range, another necessary tool in any playthrough in my eyes. Gaining tools and accessories like these make you feel better about yourself in the world of Terraria. But as another night comes, a daring message appears on screen. You feel an evil presence watching you. Enlisting fear in the player, it's time to go to the surface to investigate. And after a while, the first major boss of the game appears, the Eye of Cthulhu. This no doubt may come as a shock to first-time players. The first few nights have been rather tame, but now a giant eye is intimidating the player, charging at them and shooting smaller eyes at them. If you have a decent amount of weapons, armor, and accessories, the fight isn't too difficult, as it mainly serves as the game testing you to see if you're ready for what's to come. You might defeat the boss in a very close fashion, as it charges at you relentlessly in its last phase, especially on expert difficulty or higher. But once you do and you reap in the rewards, the same feeling is felt every time. I think I'm good. I think I have a shot at this. I think I'm ready to face whatever Terraria throws at me next. If I can be caught off guard in the middle of an expedition and successfully face off against a boss I wasn't prepared for, I think I might just understand the game now. After fighting the Eye of Cthulhu, or perhaps even a little beforehand, different types of battle will open up to you in the form of 4 major classes. While you don't need to stick to a specific class and can use any weapon however you'd like, sticking to a particular class's armor lineup and accessory benefits can help aid your preferred style of combat. The melee class keeps defense high and focuses on close-range weapons like swords and spears to close in on the enemy. Melee used to be a strange pick since Terraria's combat doesn't exactly thrive in close-range strategies, but the addition of mid-range yo-yos and major buffs in recent updates have elevated it to a preferred class of mine. Magic goes all in on DPS with wicked sorcery using staffs, spells, freaking space guns. Whatever twisted idea for a weapon the devs might have had likely got thrown into the magic class, and it's all the better for it, each weapon only being limited by the mana meter, which can be increased via different buffs and using fallen stars to craft mana crystals to get permanent increases. The range class is great for those who don't want to focus on the magic meter, yet still want to use attacks with, well, range to take out enemies and bosses from a distance using bows, cannons, harpoons, and obviously guns. So many guns. Your only limitation is that most range weapons require ammo, yet most of the time ammo is stupidly easy to obtain unless if you want ammo with different functions like piercing arrows, exploding arrows, homing bullets, the works. Summoner is the last major class that unfortunately gets the least attention. There aren't many summoner weapons and armor sets in the game, but summoners use minions to help defeat enemies for you, though you yourself can still use whips to not only attack enemies but increase the efficiency and damage of your summons. Summoner is my personal least favorite, but it is helpful when it comes to building so your minions can fend off enemies. Each class has their own strengths and weaknesses, yet each one plays differently enough to vastly affect your playthrough of the game, and makes trying a new file with a new class all the more fun. And thus, after deciding what direction you're going to go in, your battles begin, or perhaps they've already begun. The Eye of Cthulhu isn't always your first encounter with a boss or an event. Sometimes you'll be minding your own business, and a goblin army will start invading your village, so you'll have to frantically return back and fend off all of them before they kill all your NPCs, and they won't leave until the meter here is at 100%. Randomly during the day, it may start raining slime, and defeating enough slimes will cause King Slime to summon, bouncing quickly towards you and summoning an army of slimes to defend him. The next major boss is most likely to happen, however. But to get to that, we need to talk about the types of evil biomes in Terraria. Biomes that are unaccepted to be lived in by all NPCs in the game. The Corruption and the Crimson. The corruption is an ill-witted world represented by the sins of all Terrarians, with soul-eating creatures waiting to maul you to death upon entry. The Crimson is a wasteland of body parts and blood, with face monsters creeping around and bloodsucklers climbing on the walls. The Crimson biome itself is also a living, breathing entity. Yikes. An average non-seeded world can have one of the two evil types, and they affect what enemies in the biome you face, what items you get from their materials and bosses, and yeah, the bosses are completely different, yet are summoned in the same way. You might go around throwing bombs to destroy the durable stone in the area, and you'll find a glowing orb or heart that will most likely entice you to go near it to see what the fuss is about. And upon destroying it, you're given a cool new item, but also a creepy message in the corner of the screen. So you destroy another one, giving you yet another good item. The game's warning me, but surely one more wouldn't hurt, right? Destroy one more and the Eater of Worlds or the Brain of Cthulhu will spawn to try to take your life. The Eater of Worlds is a giant worm that needs to be carved up bit by bit. And the Brain of Cthulhu is a hive mind that requires destruction of its cell minions to open up the heart to deal damage to the brain. I mean, the heart. Guess this boss plays into the fact that the Crimson is an entity. After this, it's likely you'll be ready to face off against the only thing keeping you from exploring the dungeon that can be spotted early in your playthrough, Skeletron. He's fairly easy on the normal difficulty, but he's a real challenge in Expert and Master, suggesting you to take out his hands before dealing damage to the head, which starts shooting homing skulls at you. Defeating him pretty much opens the rest of the game to you. You can now freely explore the dungeon and fight the tough skeletons inside, and steal goodies inside like shields preventing knockback, a large amount of magic weapons, a super fast sword called the Muramasa, a handgun, and especially the Shadow Key, a key allowing you to unlock every chest that was previously locked in the underworld, so you can obtain the best items in the game thus far. By this point, Terraria has formed you into a fine warrior. Using the tools from the underworld, you feel like you can take on anything. There's even some optional bosses like the Queen Bee and Deerclops from Don't Starve that have their own rewards worth achieving. Every enemy in the game feels like it can be combated with relative ease. You may even feel like you don't need a guide. Oh. There's one last literal wall keeping you from being granted the throne. The Wall of Flesh. This hellish abomination can only be spawned by throwing a guide voodoo doll in a large pit of lava, sacrificing the guide in the process. This serves as Terraria's largest test yet. The wall is constantly closing in on whatever direction it's going, firing lasers, worms, and flesh-eating fiends to try to obliterate you. As you decrease its health, it starts closing in faster and faster, firing more lasers at you, getting more and more desperate, even outrunning you on Expert. And as you panic and whittle down its last inch of health, it's over. As you bask in your victory and reap the rewards in the chamber that spawns, you probably won't even think about the message that appears below. You've won. Defeating the Wall of Flesh guarantees the Pwn Hammer, allowing you to destroy demon altars, which were stations that were previously only used for crafting. Though as you go to do this simple task, a realization slowly starts to seep in, as things are not the way they used to be. There's a new biome that shows up out of nowhere called the Hollow, the complete opposite of the Corruption and Crimson, featuring wondrous fairy tale creatures and a bright, optimistic aesthetic. This is nothing like anything you've encountered before, and after destroying some demon altars, your world will be blessed with new types of ore. This is probably the best ore in the game, right? It's time to go down and mine it all. What in the name of... And just like that, without any kind of narrative cutscene shoving in your face, it hits you like a truck. You are now, once again, at the bottom of Terraria's massive food chain. Everything you knew about Terraria flips on its head. New and harder enemies spawn in every area, new biomes appear in unexpected locations, the corruption and crimson spread across your world far faster than they ever did before, and you are once again weak and have to climb all the way back up the ranks. This portion of the game is commonly referred to as hard mode, and for good reason. The difficulty spike is immense after you beat the Wall of Flesh, and there is now so much more to explore that Terraria's god status progression shines once again. Having the rug pulled out from under you and at the top of your game is the perfect motivation to get the players to continue playing after conquering their biggest threat yet, to go back to that sense of power they had before facing the Wall of Flesh. So now it's time to go back under and mine all the new hard mode ore you can in order to craft the only armors and weapons you can get that stand a chance against the new opposition. While there is an optional boss in the Hollow you can face to ease you into hard mode bosses in the form of Queen Slime, the trio of mechanical bosses are your first set of villains to take out. These are souped up harder versions of the Eye of Cthulhu, the Eater of Worlds, and Skeletron, forged by the mechanic by force to challenge you in ways where you'll feel like it's the first time fighting those original bosses all over again. The twins are two mechanized eyes that shoot projectiles at you at lightning speed. The Destroyer is a giant inseparable worm that fires a barrage of lasers at you. And Skeletron Prime is a robotic Skeletron with two additional hands, each with their own weapon used to incinerate you. Once defeating the mechanical bosses, the game continues to ramp up in not only difficulty, but crazy variety. Pirate invasions can occur after entering hard mode. The jungle grows restless the second all the mechanical bosses are beaten, and you can farm a new ore called chlorophyte. Life fruits will start growing from the underground jungle's grass and can even be consumed, allowing you to up your max HP to 500. These pink pulsing bulbs spawn throughout the jungle, and destroying it causes you to engage with a boss called Plantera, a giant crawling mutant plant that shoots seeds and eventually mutates to try to devour you. Defeating her grants you a temple key, so you can finally raid the impenetrable jungle temple filled with mysterious creatures, guarded by the golem that is, admittingly, one of the easiest bosses in the game. Catching this rare truffle worm in the underground mushroom biome and using it as bait in the ocean summons Duke Fishron, a bizarre demon fish that summons freaking sharknadoes and spits bubbles at you. Going into the Hollow post-Plantera at night and killing this tiny creature here angers the Empress of Light, which engages you in a flashy bullet hell boss fight with her. It's absurd and it's one of my personal favorite bosses in the game. There are also seasonal moon events in the form of the Pumpkin Moon, where you fight waves of scarecrows, hellhounds, ghosts, giant spooky trees, and a giant sentient pumpkin. And the Frost Moon has you fighting waves of Santa elves, and then Ever Screams, and then the Queen of Ice herself, and then Sand Tank. A Santa tank. Wow. You could be exploring the ocean when this drone spots you, and suddenly a freaking invasion of Martians coats your world, dropping the most high-tech weapons thus far. This game is off the charts. Then there's the final boss, which I'll get to in just a second. Suffice to say, Terraria didn't limit itself to one central theme and fleshed it out. Each type of cliché fiction trope is mentioned here in some form or fashion, whether it be the insane boss events or the vast array of weaponry. No matter what road you choose to go down, Terraria fights all expectations and is ready for you to fight as well. Terraria is a game that doesn't particularly try to stretch by any restrictive limitations. It embraces its own freedom and asks you to explore within its palette. While there is a general beginning and end to Terraria via the progression in your character growth and the various bosses, Terraria never rushes you to go in those directions. Unlike most survival games, death does not result in you losing all your acquired items by default. Softcore only makes you drop your money, encouraging you to go back and collect your earnings, while medium core does make you drop your items, and hardcore will take your entire character's life, causing you to delete your save file. In stark contrast to this, Journey mode takes a different take on the standard creative or debug mode, allowing you to change weather conditions, enemy spawn rates, difficulty, and much more on a dime, but by researching discovered items a certain number of times, you can then duplicate as many of said item as you want, giving creative players the vast amount of freedom while still making them engage in Terraria's overall progression. On the topic of difficulty, you can set your world to be one of 4 major difficulty types. There's the aforementioned Journey mode, allowing the most creative freedom. Normal mode is the average Terraria difficulty that is typically recommended for your first time playing. Expert is my preferred difficulty, granting bosses and enemies new properties and attack patterns alongside having bosses drop treasure bags for each individual player, containing everyone's own boss loot including an expert exclusive item. And Master Mode increases the health, damage, and rewards of enemies and bosses, but to balance it out, it grants you an extra accessory slot alongside having bosses drop a gold relic to display in your world. I haven't really touched on the multiplayer a whole lot, and while multiplayer does enhance the experience by having several people going to do different things together in your world, it isn't as vital to the core enjoyment of Terraria as other games are. Though there is a potion that does allow you to teleport to other players on the same team as you, which is a nice way to handle teleportation. Speaking of potions, they're very important to craft on higher difficulties to help give you an advantage in battles and general exploration. And on the topic of crafting, whenever you pick up an item, I highly recommend checking to see if it's considered to be a material or not. Why is this the case? Well, that's where the guide becomes more than a helpful tutorial. Giving the guide a material will tell you everything that you can craft in the game using that item. So to check for an item's usefulness, it's easy to find yourself consulting to the guide on items as much as you can. It's more fun than using the wiki anyways, which is still extremely helpful, don't get me wrong. Items that seem meaningless on paper could be your biggest lifesavers. I made a whole alchemy station in my latest playthrough so I had easy access to all of the plants necessary for crafting essential potions to fight bosses with. And even fishing might come into a large playing element if you want the best of the best potions. Outside of helpful consumable items, major weapons and accessories could also be considered materials, and the guide might just tell you about an incredibly good weapon, or perhaps the best shield in the game, requiring a boatload of other accessories needed to craft the thing at a tinkerer's workshop. I went on a farming spree for multiple accessories to form the Ankh shield, a shield that essentially makes you immune to most of the game's status inflictions like confusion, bleeding, weakness, etc. When I say Terraria has a boatload to explore, I don't mean the general size of the world itself, although you can set your world to be massive or small in size. Terraria wants you to explore its mechanics, its items, its events, and its variety. And when you've slain enough hard mode bosses and fleshed out your world once more to conquer the massive twist that hits you after defeating the Wall of Flesh, well, I think it's time to rise back to the top, or the moon, if you will, and enter the endgame. Once you defeat the golem in the jungle temple, a group of cultists will start chanting around the tablet back at the dungeon, and slaying them will get the lunatic cultist to engage in combat. The boss isn't majorly difficult, but he does use a variety of flashy spells unlike anything else seen in the game at this point to try to stop you. The lunatic cultist is your last barrier keeping you from endgame in Terraria. and once you defeat him, otherworldly beings immediately invade your world, guarding 4 celestial pillars scattered across the land. This sequence is commonly referred to as the Lunar Event, serving as your last training exercise containing the toughest enemies in the game. Each pillar represents a different class in the form of Solar, Nebula, Vortex, and Stardust. Solar, representing melee, has a bunch of close-ranged enemies that mostly fight on the ground, one of which summoning a worm called a Crawltipede that only targets you if you're in the air at all, and deals massive damage, encouraging heavily to battle on their turf. Nebula, representing magic, has loads of enemies with accurate magic attacks and has brain sucklers roaming around that, when attached to your head, will completely obscure your vision and deal large amounts of damage to you until they're taken out. Vortex, representing ranged, has large amounts of flying aliens, the majority of which wielding ranged weapons to gun you down. Finally, Stardust, representing summon, houses enemies that tend to summon other enemies to try to stop you, like these worms and these star cells that split off into multiple pieces as you try to destroy each of them. The objective is to destroy each pillar by killing 100 enemies by each respective pillar to break its barrier to destroy it entirely. Each pillar will drop its own fragment, which, using the new crafting station that drops from the Lunatic Cultist, will allow you to craft some of the best weapons capable of stopping all of the forces that come your way in the Lunar Event. Admittingly, this does kind of make whatever weapon you worked hard on getting before the Lunar Event a tad meaningless, since the Lunar Event weapons tend to be some of the best weapons in the game by default, only a tad worse than weapons dropped by the final boss. Speaking of, after destroying all 4 pillars, an intimidating text appears at the bottom of the screen, saying that impending doom approaches. In these brief moments of anticipation, you're given a few seconds to prepare for Terraria's final challenge. The peaceful music slowly drowns out as anxiety levels rise drastically, the screen getting darker and darker. The music eventually disappears altogether as your hands tense, ready for the final boss to appear out of thin air. The Moon Lord. In a shocking surprise, the largest character sprite in the game dominates the entire background as the embodiment of Cthulhu himself descends down from the moon to endanger the world of Terraria. The battle is no slouch. His 3 weak points fire a barrage of attacks, from his hand shooting giant eyes and homing projectiles, to his head charging up a massive laser that will obliterate your HP if you so much as graze it. For each weak point you destroy, an invincible Eye of Cthulhu will pop out to deal the same attacks unattached from the Moon Lord's body. Once all 3 weak points have been dealt with, the final phase of the boss ensues as his chest opens up to reveal his heart, as the fight becomes a race to whittle down the rest of his health while all 3 eyes bombard you in desperation to try to destroy you. This final phase is insanely nerve-wracking, but focus enough on dealing as much damage as possible, and use your character's mobility to the fullest, to defeat the king, and show who's the real boss around here. Congratulations, you're once again at the top of the world, and Terraria comes to a triumphant conclusion. Defeating the Moonlord grants many goodies, such as the portal gun, the possibility of one of several weapon drops, and a number of luminite bars used to craft the best tools and armor in the game. The Lunar Event's enemy requirement is decreased by half for each pillar for easy gathering. Typically, games of this sandbox nature don't have notable endings, so I applaud Terraria for branching out and exploring a sense of finality in its adventure. Once you've obtained the best items in the game, there isn't much else to really do in your playthrough aside from building your world to its fullest potential with relative ease. But luckily, Terraria allows its formula to be explored to even greater heights by allowing the creators to have a hand in their own content. Official mod support in the form of tModLoader comes with Terraria for absolutely free for all purchases of the game. tModLoader is a separate application that houses a massive library of mods that you can install that range from quality of life changes to complete game changers. The most notable mod that is associated with Terraria in common discussion is the Calamity mod, a mod that not only has new difficulty options and mechanics, but adds an entire game's worth of new content that even extends past the Moonlord. While I won't go into it in length here, I can say that it gets a mighty recommendation from me, and is generally one of the most beloved mods in video games as a whole. With Terraria's massive world, insane variety, and extensive experimentation in the form of mods, there's a hefty amount for both you and Terraria to explore. It's difficult not to see why Terraria is one of the most beloved and highest selling games of all time. I barely even gone to some of the minor issues I have with the game, which mainly consists of small nitpicks like how overpowered Lunar Event items are compared to the rest of the game's offerings that took much more effort to obtain, how controller play is generally difficult to play with as opposed to keyboard and mouse controls, and a mechanic I'm personally not a fan of in the form of graveyard biomes appearing when dying in a certain spot too many times and spawning ghosts upon destruction of gravestones, which serve generally as difficult enemies when you first start playing the game. Yet trying to find flaws with Terraria is like trying to find one very specific block in a world that generates in a sea of other blocks, so its downsides are hardly even worth discussing. More importantly, Terraria embodies freedom in ways that rival the largest games in the industry, and for something that is only $10 on Steam, it's admirable on a level I can hardly form into words. I wouldn't mind paying $60 for this game, though the price is actually increased on consoles, so it's only really a steal on Steam and mobile. As cliche as it may sound, Terraria is more than a video game. It's its own world, a character, one that you thrive in with a progression system partnering you with glee the whole way through, from its weapons, to its bosses, to its world, and its freedom. You are the creator. You are the one who digs. You are the warrior. You are the explorer. You are the world. You are Terraria.